and blessing, unity with the L-O-V-E. Love is the solution, so set your love free with the L-O-V-E. Further evolution and blessed unity.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Self-Love Show. I'm your host, Trish. This is my lovely co-host, Dawn Light.
Good morning.
And we have the most amazing, dear friend of mine, Joe, on our show today. And let me tell you a little bit about Joe. Joe Zarate Sanderlin is a licensed marriage and family therapist based in California. They have a private practice currently all telehealth, good job, in San Francisco, where they specialize in working with relationships, specifically the LGBT and alternative sexuality communities. And they work with 3 employee assistance programs where they treat a variety of clients working in the Bay Area. They have been involved in the alternative sexuality communities in New York, Boston, and San Francisco for over 20 years. They have an adjunct professor. They are an adjunct professor at Golden Gate University, teaching therapeutic communication and counseling skills, human sexuality, and couple and family therapy. They have a passion for communication, teaching clients and students how therapy can be effective, and for helping people help themselves. They parent 8-year-old boy and girl twins with their partner of 25 years, brew kombucha, coach, referee soccer, try to ski, and would love to return to knitting.
I love that.
Well, thank you. You know, I like to add in the humanizing aspect of the last bit, because so many times it's like, oh, these are all the things I did, but what do you do for fun? What do you do for self-care?
Yeah. Which is really what we're doing today. So
Yeah.
in our communities and in our lives, especially over the last year, isolation and quarantine and the way that we've been living has been really very different, right? And for some of us who have seasonal depression, or for some of us who have some stuff about going out of our homes, like it's a big conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to read one more little bit of the show. Is, while we are social beings, we may have to rely on ourselves more during these challenging times. Socially distanced activities, video chats can help, though they may not be enough. Digging into the depths of our own positive energy can serve us well in the best of times and can be essential in these trying times. So Joe today is going to share ways that you can do self-care while we're continuing to quarantine and isolate, including how to incorporate affirmations into your new ways, as well as to tend to yourself. So I'm curious how, outside of quarantine, like this last year was really awkward, right? I mean, I'm just going to say it's awkward for me. I was like, whoa, everything's different. And though I've had periods of isolation and quarantine, I wouldn't call them quarantine, but isolation before, even like sometimes in the dead of winter, or places where I was really in an emotional process that I didn't feel safe enough to go out into the world. I'm curious.
Maybe sick or ill or injured as well.
Exactly. And I'm curious if we can just talk a little bit about the places where we isolate, not even in quarantine.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because one thing that's come up for me, and I work with a lot of privileged clients, because I'm working with folks in tech, that there are a lot of people who have never, or I try not to use never, not really been restricted in what they're doing in their lives. So this idea that you can't go out to eat, you can't travel, you can't do all this sort of stuff. So I think it's been such a new experience for some people that even though I'm a hardcore introvert, I like to stay home sometimes, but I also need to be social. I know there are a lot of people who are super social that this has been particularly hard for them, because it's their ways of getting refilled from other people aren't there. So that's why this really came up with me in terms of, how do we tend to ourselves as we are doing things? And I will be the first to admit, and I know, Trish, you'll admit it, and Dawn, I don't know you well, but you'll probably admit it, we don't always do it great for ourselves. And that's one of the reminders that I want to talk about today, is showing up for yourself. But this isolation, I think it's one thing to isolate on purpose. So sometimes I need a little downtime. I noticed even when my kids, they're very different. My son, even at 2 or 3, would be in the playground, and then he would go off to the side of the playground for a little while, and then he would come back. I was like, oh, wait, he's not avoiding kids. He's taking care of himself. And it's this interesting instinctual thing that kids do. But then we grow out of it, right? Because, we have to be social. We have to show up. We have to do all these things. So I don't know if you have more thoughts on, what it's like. What's it been like for you? For me as an introvert, it's been, I just miss people, but I also enjoy the alone time. On the one hand, I miss people. On the other hand, I wasn't alone in my house for 6 months, which is a really bizarre experience when you think about it. Some people are isolated. They live alone. Other people were stuck, quote unquote, with the people that were in their bubble for a long time. And that presented its own difficulties as well. So.
Mm-hmm. Yes, for me, I feel very, very thankful because I really enjoy, like you, my alone time. And like, I value that, like, relishing in the guidance of spirit inside of myself, right? And like leaning into that. So I've just used the quarantine and this time as momentum for that energy to arise and really deeper guidance of like, all right, what's next? What are the next steps? What are you asking of me? And so for me, and I'm very fortunate, I have a family, so I'm not stuck alone, and I do miss people. I miss going out. I miss, because it was radically different the way it was before. But at the same time, I've just leaned into like really allowing myself to enjoy the change and enjoy the journey and enjoy the process instead of resisting it and pushing against it. I decided to lean into it and go, okay, this is meant to happen right now. And what I can allow all the change to come, right? And I can let go of resisting change and lean into the change and actually allow myself to enjoy it.
That sense of yielding, and it's almost like surfing. It's like you're going along with the flow. If you try to push back too hard, it's not going to work for you. I was thinking about, we were supposed to do this 6 weeks ago. And the night before, my mom passed away after a long illness. She would have been 90 this past Monday, so she lived a very full life. And, she took time at the end of her life to connect with her children and, sent items or letters or, just really took good time to do it. But I realized that today is actually a great day to do this just because we're in this explicitly transitionary period. Now, I'm speaking as someone who's in San Francisco, so Northern Hemisphere. We are going into spring. I know in the Southern Hemisphere, if you're watching, you're going into fall, but you're going into, the opportunity to renew. We're going into the renewal period. And whether you're spiritual or scientific or a little bit of both, you can appreciate these changes. So there are rituals that happen around now. We've got the equinox, we've got Easter coming up. But I also think if you're a very scientific person, you can appreciate the flowers are blooming and the birds are chirping a little bit more. It's a little lighter in the end of the day. So I think this transition time is really powerful. And, people are out and about more. Some of the restrictions have gone down and people are testing what it's going to be like. So I'm really curious what it's going to be like for people to be social again. Are we going to go out dancing and dance 4 feet away from each other because we don't want to go closer? So little silly things like that. And ritual to me is one of those things that's whatever, ritual is a word that some people don't like, but whatever you call the things that you do in life. I recently did a support group with a school social worker for parents, and the metaphor we had was, what was your sourdough starter from last year? So what's the thing that you didn't do before that you are now doing that can grow? And one of the things I thought of is with my mother's memorial, they did a live service in New York, but they also streamed it. And I don't know if a lot of folks streamed rituals before this. But for me, that was brilliant because some people wouldn't be able to travel to New York, or they, for whatever reason, money or time or whatnot. So being able to participate in that ritual was really important to me. So I'm hoping that as we go forward, we will take some of these things. I hear stories about families connecting through Zoom. It's like, wow, I never talked to my cousins before, but all of a sudden we were in this situation where I'm talking to my cousins, and that's awesome. So what can we take? What I hesitate sometimes to silver lining things, but what positive thing can we take out of this challenging experience that we can bring forward? And as Trish was saying, it's like, yes, we're talking about self-care and isolation, but isolation doesn't happen just because of COVID. Or sometimes we isolate ourselves on purpose for very good reasons, and we still need to tend to ourselves in that time.
So I love that. And just, yeah, we do have a tendency, or maybe I'll just speak from my own experience. I've had a tendency to isolate when I'm going through deep healing moments around some experiences that I've had, like getting out of a mutually abusive relationship. Like those places I needed time because I didn't feel safe to have other influences in my life. I had to find that inner strength in me. And I think that especially when there's so much just coming at you, regardless of whether it's like online or in person before, that sometimes it's like overload. And sometimes it's like, oh gosh, I actually need to drop back and do self-care. And what I've learned over the last year specifically, but I mean over the last years, but this last year was really, really profound for me to understand that self-care isn't like doing your nails or, taking a bath or like scrubbing your face and like the whole thing. But really what self-care is for me now is like, wow, Joe, wow, Dawn, I really want to hang out today. And I really need to make a self-honoring choice to take care of my emotional being right now. I need to be an amoeba and lay on the floor and cry for the remainder of the day. Like I just need that so that I can express out. Or actually I can't, I need to go see my therapist, or I have an extra call with my coach today. And what self-care looks like to me now is very different than it looked a year ago, because the opportunity to take a look at my own personal rituals, my own personal habits, both mentally and socially. Like I had to look at those things. And I'm curious, whoever's watching or listening right now, can you let us in on what are your self-care moments that you do now? What changed from before and what changed to now, of like, what are your rituals now? Your self-care, your self-love rituals. What are the places where you self-source your needs there and where you take really good care of you?
Some people think self-care is selfish, and strange, right? I mentored under Dossie Easton for 2.5 years, and one of the things that she would say is, how much self do you get to have? And I love that, because it's, the showing up for yourself is so important. I as a therapist and as a person, I think that, catchy phrases stick in your brain. So one of the ones is, put your mask on before helping others. So if you're going to show up as a healer, you need to tend to yourself. If you're showing up as a wounded healer, you still need to tend to yourself. Especially. The other one that came to me one time is, we all know the golden rule, most likely, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. My mantra is the platinum rule, which is do unto yourself as you would do unto others. Because especially the healer types,
Beautiful.
We are often great at taking care of other people, not so great at taking care of ourselves.
Right.
So this reminder, not only is it okay, it's necessary to show up for yourself. Yeah.
Well, and I really love what both of you have said, and I feel like I can add a little to this. It's when we make subtle agreements, like, oh, okay, I'm going to give myself that extra 20 minutes to meditate, or I'm going to sit down to do my higher self writing, or I'm going to sit in this sauna, or, those are my things, right? That are my self-care rituals that I do on a regular, like sacred bath, sauna, higher self writing, freeform writing, writing in the journal, like just being with self to process what's going on. or just laying on the bed and crying if I'm just truly in it, in a process, right?
Yeah.
But it's when we make agreements with ourselves and then don't follow through with those personal agreements we've made with spirit, right? That's where the sticky part comes in, and where the guilt and the shame, and then we get caught in a pattern of like overgiving and overdoing for others because we're not giving to ourselves, and then it stacks, and then it keeps stacking because it's subtle. It begins subtly, but then it grows and grows and grows, and then it becomes a full-blown thing for someone because they're not deeply listening, leaning in, and giving themselves that sacred opportunity to follow spirit's guidance, right? Just follow the guidance in the light inside of your soul. Like, what is your soul asking you to like birth right now in the world? What is your soul asking to like rise through your heart in this time, and giving yourself that opportunity to write it out, to speak it out on Otter if you need, or whatever it may be, or just to soak and relish in the understanding of what it is.
Yeah. Well, and sometimes we need an outside voice. So I'll share an anecdote that involves Trish. So 5 or so years ago, she and I were hanging out, and I was stressed out, and I was coming up on another season of working for Burning Man. So I used to work for Burning Man. And the question Trish asked me was, when was the last time you traveled as an adult by yourself, for yourself, more or less? And I thought about it, and it was never. I was in my mid to late 40s, and I'd always had to, seeing family, traveling for work. And, so Trish's question is like, so when can you do that? And I said, well, I have to work at Burning Man. And she stopped me and said, do you? And I went, so, in that case, there was this anima muse figure that came into being. And my hope is that we can ask ourselves that question. And what happened for me in that moment is it took me about 48 hours, but I called my boss up at Burning Man and said, hey, I need to do some stuff for myself, and I can't come this year. And she was like, that is totally fine. We will work with it. Go take care of yourself. And, I so much appreciated that from her. It, wasn't this stressed out thing of like, oh, what are we going to do? This is really short. It was like 2 weeks before Burning Man. Like, what are we going to do? It was just acceptance. And, what I ended up doing was negotiating with my partners. Like, I was going to be at Burning Man for 10 days. Like, I looked at plane flights and I went to Scotland for 10 days, and I am blessed to have that opportunity, but I pretty much just drove around and looked at Neolithic sites and went to, got into the spirit and whatnot. But, it was just Trish asking me those questions, when have you traveled for yourself? When can you do it? So my thing is, can we ask ourselves those questions? So that's the platinum rule of, can we check in with ourselves about those things? Because we may not have someone to ask that question.
Joe, I love this, because this is the essentially like the thing that I do in the world. Like, do you have to do that? Or what's alive for you? So on my screen, I'm not going to show it, but on the like on my phone, the thing that comes up when it's the lock screen, and the thing on my computer is a picture of me that says, what is the most self-honoring choice that you can make right now? So I'm constantly reminding myself to realign with my values. And that's what I invite all of you to write it down. Like, what's the most self-honoring choice that I can make right now? Like, especially if you're feeling conflicted or obligated or resentful, especially if you're feeling resentful about doing the things that you're doing. Like, ooh, wait, because nobody wants to just show up in your resentment. I'm not like going to Dawn's house and being like, I have to be here. Like, she's like, ew, don't, gross, bye. She wants me to show up at her house and like, oh, I'm so happy to be here. This is in my full fuck yes. I'm here because I want to be here, right?
Yeah.
Well, something I wanted to bring up just before we move forward is the idea that self-care is selfish. And what I hear a lot from my parent clients is that, okay, I'm going to walk back for a second. Our society and many societies, especially religious cultures, have a tendency to tell us that we're supposed to give all of ourselves, to sacrifice ourselves, to others. And what that
We're supposed to should on ourselves, basically.
exactly. And so what happens is that we become so depleted, and that we're giving from this place of like, I have nothing left to give, and I'm like, and from that place, like when someone shows up, I'm just going to ask all of you listening right now, when someone shows up in their self-sourcedness, and you've felt it before, when they're like, yes, I'm here, I feel, I'm feeling alive. I'm not saying feeling good. I'm just present, right? I'm feeling, I'm here, and I'm full on here. When they show up in this way versus I'm here and I have nothing else left to give and I just have nothing, like I'm barely here. What kind of energy do you get? How do you receive that person? When you're in that space and you're just like barely there giving, like that's the place where it's like, can we shift the dynamic where we can self-source first and then show up to Joe and then show up to Don, or then show up in that place of like, I'm self-sourced, I'm here, I'm present. You don't have to be 100%. I'm not saying like you have to self-source all of your needs, because it's not, that doesn't work in the world. I'm just inviting the place right here where it's like, self-care isn't selfish. It's actually a new way to live. You don't have to participate in the construct that we're told to develop the codependent behaviors of like overgiving. We don't have to do that anymore.
Right. I agree. This happened to me yesterday. I'm like cleansing right now, and I had a migraine yesterday, and I had a commitment of a beautiful Zoom that I'm participating in this program that I'm doing. And I felt obligated to show up because I had made the commitment, right? And I was so excited to, but I knew that I was not able in the capacity because my head was hurting so much that all I needed to do was lay down and sleep. So I reached out to the ladies and I was like, look, I'm still here in the love and the commitment, but I'm not feeling well and I need to lay down. And they honored it. They heard me. And I was so grateful that I gave myself that gift, because I had another Zoom that I had to do in the evening that I also attended, but it was like I knew that the capacity of doing both was just not possible for me with a massive headache.
Yeah. And this is similar to my experience with my mom passing, whereas I was supposed to do this. I was doing a training. I teach on Tuesdays. I was also teaching on Saturdays, and I have clients. And the other, added value to this is the day before I found out my mother's passing, my daughter and my son got their legs all tied up, and she face planted and cracked one of her adult teeth in half. So she had to go to the emergency dentist. So the synchronicity that I saw was, I'm teaching family therapy, and the generation after me and the generation before me are all in crisis right now. But I had to make some decisions around, this is not a typical job as a therapist or as a teacher. And, I decided like I can't show up for my class, so I'm going to make it asynchronous. And I did that. And I was transparent with them. And I saw some clients, but not other clients. But I really had to balance out, like, what can I give that is going to be valuable, that's not going to thoroughly deplete me? And especially working in Silicon Valley, where that hypomania is a positive trait, quote unquote. It's like work, 80 hours a week. If you think about performance reviews, meets expectations is not enough. It's got to be exceeds, if not, ridiculously exceeds expectations. So I think we've been trained this way to give all no matter what. So I joke around that my kids must think I'm incontinent because I go to the bathroom a lot, because I need 5 minutes. I need a little bit of time away, and they understand that, bathroom time is private time, right? So having to be creative around that has been important. And whether so I'm a little more transparent with my students, but whether my clients know it or not, I think they can tell when I'm doing self-care. And in the same way that the kids can kind of tell when you're BSing them or not BSing them, they're amazing. I love, I have a love-hate relationship with little kids because they have no filter. So they'll just say things right in front of you that sometimes are very lesson oriented, but you have to confront that lesson like, oh yeah, I'm not taking care of myself. So, but yeah, interesting stuff, right?
Beautiful. I just love the reflection of the balance there. You're really incorporating leaning into giving yourself that like 5-minute break in the bathroom. It's true. If you're a parent, all parents will relate with this. Like, absolutely. I've taken that 5-minute break in the bathroom when I needed, you know, I really can relate to what you're saying.
Yeah. Well, and I'm hoping, and we'll talk about this a little bit more later, but knowing that we're never going to be positive all the time, and we're not, hopefully not going to be negative all the time. So you've heard this phrase, strike while the iron's hot, which is a smithing phrase. That's how you make the thing on the anvil. I like to say strike while the iron is cold, which means when you're well resourced and you're not in conflict, that is the time to prepare yourself for the times that you are challenged. Now I'll get some pushback sometimes from couples like, well, when things are good, we don't want to talk about the challenging stuff. But I also point out that, the best time to look for a job is when you don't need a job, right? Because you're in a good headspace. So that's why I think it's important to set aside some time when you're in a good headspace to do some reflection. Because we know, and this is my experience, but I think it is, somewhat universal, that as a dear friend of mine in the East Coast likes to say, when you're down, sometimes the light at the end of the tunnel is the tunnel, and sometimes it's the train. And it's really hard to tend to yourself if you have not prepared in that moment.
If you just dropped in, go back and listen to that piece because that's really, really important. This idea that we're supposed to get help in crisis is, I think that, oh God, I'm just so grateful you brought this up. It's like, yesterday I taught a class and I promoted therapy and coaching in like this festival. I was like, you know what? Get help now. Because when you're in crisis, it's hard, it can be more challenging to get out and then move forward. One of my spiritual teachers shared, I'm going to butcher her saying, but it's something like, healing comes not in the crisis, but at the edge of it. So when you are safe is when you can actually make the most movement. I mean, don't get me wrong. I've had profound movements in the middle of like full on breakdowns. And I've also had profound shifts in perspective without it being like clawing, without it feeling like I'm like clawing at the shift. When I'm like, you know what? I feel fucking great right now. I'm going to read Polysecure. I'm going to read How to Do the Work by Nicola Pera, or I'm going to, talk to Dawn about this thing that keeps recycling, or I'm going to talk to Joe. It's about showing up for myself in the moments where I feel amazing because I'm resourced, because I actually have the capacity to think rationally, to feel rationally, and connect to myself at that moment. Like, thank you.
Trish, can I offer you a reframe?
Give it to me.
So this is also an example of something that I like to call consent for conversation, because we talk about consent for touch or consent for acts, but sometimes we just want to on people, and no wonder conversations don't go well. You said you were going to butcher your spiritual guide's statement. How about saying, through the lens of Trish, this is my understanding of this statement, so that just sort of positive way of looking at it. And, so much of my work with people is around language, and it's around positive reframes. Now, some people are like, well, some things can't be positive all the time. I get it. There are always going to be edge cases, and there are always going to be the edge case people who are going to bring up the edge cases.
Yes.
But, language is powerful.
Really
and San Chang, who's someone who works in the trans community and co-wrote a book on working with trans folk, and I'm in a consultation group with them, what they say is, words have the power to affirm or disaffirm people. And again, I'm paraphrasing. So we know that we can snowball in a negative way. So my goal is to snowball in a positive way.
Yeah.
So if we think about gratitude practice, like you don't have to have gratitude that there's 100 million vaccine doses and things are good. My gratitude sometimes is like, this is a damn good sandwich. And, some people think that you have to really dig deep for gratitude, but it can be something really simple. And that's the sort of thing that can snowball. What were you going to say, Dawn?
I was going to say, I've heard this quote before. It's like, if the only gratitude you have is the word thank you over and over and over again, that prayer will suffice for your life.
Yeah. Well, if you think about it, if you're from a Christian or Jewish background, what does amen mean? So be it. That can be the gratitude or the acknowledgement in that moment.
This is why I love these people. I thank you for the reframe, and you're absolutely right. So I just want to drop this into the space. Our language literally creates the reality in which we live. And it's likely created by the way we were taught language through our family and the school system that we were in, or the community that we were in. So if you ever wonder how you think, it's like walking it back to see, so sometimes I'll hear my mother's voice in my head in the way she says things, because she's from the East Coast. And it's just not the way that I speak. It's not how I grew up in Montana, right? So sometimes I'll be like, oh, that's a way. Oh, aunt. Aunt is one of those words.
Aunt,
like,
yeah.
Everyone says aunt here. Aunt.
Yeah, aunt. Yeah,
and so that's actually in my reality. I say auntie because that's the reality that I lived in, or that's her languaging. So when we recreate or when we're repatterning our languaging, it's literally repatterning the way that we see and filter the world, right? Dawn is always like, hey, come this way, or come this way. And I'm like, yes, thank you for the reminder. And I think that it's also important to have good friends to remind you to get back on track, or to be like, hey, I know your values here, come over here. Or, to lean on other people who have your best interest.
Well, I really hear what you're saying. It's so important. And when I work with the women that I work with, like my clients, I love them so much. And I get them to build their team, right? Who's on your team that's like your go-to people? Like, you're going to have a coach, you're going to have like certain mentors. You're also going to have like, who is that friend that's always like your 5 a.m. friend you can call no matter what, but they're always going to have like the highest and best guidance for you, that that you can bounce anything off of them and to them, and it's always going to be so aligned and deeply awakening for your soul and your spiritual work that you're endeavoring in. Right. And so it's really important to kind of assess your life and who are these people? Are they family members? Are they friends? Are they, and if you feel like you have more negative people around you, then this is your opportunity to really reach out and get clear in your heart. Like, who do I want on my team? And I can choose those people. I have the opportunity to choose those people. And they don't have to be the negative people that have always been in my family or friends, right? And it's like slowly, I see it as an analogy of like weeding our garden, right? Like, we have this gorgeous garden that we're blossoming. We're the flower in the garden blossoming, right? We've grown our roots deep, and we're continuing to grow our roots deep through our spiritual work. But it's like, oh, wow, I need to go to the outstretches of my garden and like weed my garden in this area. And, that area might be finances, or it might be, deepening my relationships with my parents, or it might be, gosh, I really need to do some self-care here in my marriage or in my work, right? Like, there's all these different areas of our life at different phases and times, depending on what age we are and where we're at in our lifespan. Right. So it's important to like weed our garden and build your team that's going to support you through no matter what changes and challenges you go through, soul curriculum that you've chosen as a spiritual being, right? That we're here to live into without the fear, without the anxiety, learning to like let go of the like barriers we've built against love.
Scott calls that the board of advisors. Scott DeComas from Love Coach Academy, and it's a story. I'll tell it as best as I can, but I love this story about Jane Fonda. that he met her and was doing a documentary with her. He's a filmmaker. And he's like, how do you handle all this like hate? Like all these like people just hate you. And how do you handle all this stuff? And she's like, oh, I have a board of advisors. I have a group of 5 people that these are the only people that I value. Like I actually value their opinion in my life. This is how I move forward. And I have 5 trusted advisors. And that really stuck with me. It's stuck with me over the last while. I was like, oh, whose opinion do I actually want in my life, moving my life forward?
Yeah.
And to not just listen to everyone and their mother, but to really sit and think about whose life do I want to live like, whose behavior I want to live like, because you are who you hang out with. You become the person you hang out with, because that's just the way human beings do. We have mirror neurons and we just like do the thing. We do the thing. So so it's really like, who are you? And that's part of self-care. Is like, if I have a friend who's constantly picking at me about whatever they're judgmental about, is that going to actually help me move forward in my life? I'm not sure. But if they're being loving and kind and interested in my personal growth, but not trying to like contort me to become something that they want me to be, like if they're really up in my like Dawn or like Joe, like, hey, they'll check me sometimes. And if you do, you have loving friends that check you. Like, hey, you're doing that thing. Are you doing it again? Do you know are you doing it consciously? Are you choosing it consciously? And that's the key place, is like someone who's going to lovingly call you in versus someone who's going to poke at you and like, oh, you're doing it wrong. Right?
Yeah.
Are
you familiar with the
Go ahead.
Are you familiar with the Johari window? Do you know about this? So it's a 2x2 grid, and it's the who knows what. So the upper right corner is you know it and the public knows it. I'm sorry, upper left corner. The upper right corner is you don't know it, but the public knows it. So these are your blind spots, right? There's things that other people see, but you don't see. Then there's things that you see, but others don't see. So that's your internal experience. And then that bottom right corner is the unknown unknowns. So this is the thing that you don't see and other people don't see. So from a Jungian point of view, we would call this the unconscious. If you were talking cognitive behavioral, this would be the automatic thoughts and the racing thoughts or whatnot. So having those trusted people in that upper right corner to help you find out your blind spots. So people will be like, well, my people tell me I talk too much and I interrupt all the time. So, well, in social situations, when we go back to having more face-to-face social situations, have a trusted person who's going to kick you under the table so they let you know when you're doing it. Because how are you going to know when you're doing it? And I like that idea of just bringing in, allies, because there are people who, yes, there are some people that we do need to keep in our lives who are not necessarily non-toxic, but, not necessarily toxic, but they're not going to necessarily add. And yet we still need to figure out ways to be with them.
Communicating with loving compassion and seeing them not as a problem.
Right.
Misha calls green lensing them. And I've been really learning about this idea of like, instead of red lensing them, making them wrong and bad and like a perpetrator or some sort of like green lensing them of like, hey, they're whole, beautiful, wonderful people. And this is how they show up in the world. And I love that. I'm like, oh, okay, let's green lens that person. Because they're just behaving to try to get their needs met. Most people behave or speak or think in ways to get their needs met. Like if you just want to boil it all down, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And you can do it consciously or you can do it unconsciously. So the unconscious way is just, that's the sort of, it's like you're grabbing at things. The conscious way is more like, nonviolent communication, where it's like you get to have needs and you get to get within reason, get them met. Trish, you mentioned self-compassion, and that's one of the, you need to be compassionate to yourself. How? Right? That's always, as do I. So I will talk about mine, which is the Gestalt idea of empty chair. So what I do sometimes with clients is like, all right, so you just told me about what's going on with you. Imagine your dear friend, imagine Trish just told you that thing, what would you say back to Trish? And it's one of those it's one of those ideas where you see the light bulb go off, and it's like, it's so simple. It almost seems ridiculously simple, but that idea of, can you do that for yourself? Can you give yourself the love and the understanding? Because again, as I said earlier, we're great at taking care of other people most of the time. We're not so great at taking care of ourselves. Now, the other thing I wanted to point out is that we think about projections, the psychological idea of like putting our stuff on other people, frequently negative, but there are also positive projections where you might say, oh, Trish is so self-assured and a good speaker and just shows up all the time. I wish I was like that. The reality is that probably lives within you. And if you withdraw that projection onto that person and look for it inside of you, hopefully you'll be able to find that little piece of, what is it that makes that person different. I worked with a client once who was in a position where they were at one down based on their license, so nurse versus doctors. And they had this person that they would be at meetings, and they just had such gravitas and such, impact. And the thing that they realized that the person did was, when someone asked them a question, they paused and then answered. So like that sort of slowed things down, gave it a cadence, gave them a little time to think. I reveal to my students, when you ask me a question and I say, that's an excellent question, that means I need 2 more seconds to think about the answer. I don't know if you've done stuff like that too. So.
No, but I'm thinking about it.
Yeah.
That's really truly where the power lies, is right in between, between stimulus and response is that opportunity to lean and allow spirit to that's it. Yeah. That is the place. So what you're saying is so powerful, right? And we're all can lean into this practice, right? When someone asks us a question, we can lean into allowing ourselves to pause in that. And so the guidance can come through.
Yeah. Well, going back to our theme, if you're feeling yourself a little distressed and you're alone or isolated, I think it can be valuable to curl up in bed and cry. But if that's not the thing that's working for you, if you feel really stuck, what if you just, shift up your position a little bit? Or you get up and you get your water. Or you go to the bathroom. You create a somatic change, a physical change, which can give you that little teeny bit of a way in to stop those thoughts from just racing. And, similar to if you're in a conflict, doing a bit of a timeout. It's like, hey, let's just chill for 20 minutes and come back to this, because I'm realizing that I can't show up for the conversation. It's not you're yelling at me, it's I can't show up. So what I said to my clients that I had to cancel, I said, something happened in my family, and I know that I can't be an effective therapist today, so we'll have to reschedule. And that's so cool. Yeah, I mean, it's really super powerful.
Self-ownership, that right there. Someone just asked me that yesterday. It's how do you, if you can't show up, how do you tell someone that? You tell them that.
You tell them that, yeah.
Just that. It's just honest. I can't show up fully presently right now.
Yeah.
Let's reschedule.
So going back to the strike while the iron's cold, so the practice that I bring to this conversation is around affirmations. So for most of us, affirmations might be verbal. They might be, writing in lipstick on the mirror. It could be Post-it notes on your screen. One way that I like to do affirmations, now, again, speaking from a privileged point of view, many of us have a portable recording device with us most of the time. So when you're in a really, really positive headspace, open up that voice recorder and say, Joe, right now things may seem really, really hard. And I know that you are resilient. And I'm tearing up just thinking about this. I know that you are powerful. And I know that you have gone through this before. And that you will make it through and you will come out through the other side. Put that away. Put that on your phone. Record a handful of them. because when you need them, they will be there. And just think about this idea that, it's when you can't hear it from another person, you're hearing it in your own voice, affirming yourself. And only you know your experience. Someone else can empathize, but you can really dig into that experience, and you can find, because we know when we're in that hole, it's hard to dig out. But most of us logically know that we've been here before and we'll be here again, and that's okay. So that's my main, my main gift is, affirm yourself in your own voice. And, I also say that, the thing with a lot of self-help is that it works for some people and not for other people, and that's fine.
True.
So if the verbal thing is not going to work for you, that's fine. You can figure, I always try to work with, what are your strengths?
Yes.
What are the things, so Trish, it might be one thing. Dawn, for you, it might be recording a prayer that that you eloquently did before we started today. What is the thing that plays to your strengths? Because I don't want to reinvent the wheel. I want to do things that we're already doing that we may not notice.
Right.
Because, just the noise that's going in the background.
Mm-hmm.
And, those two practices, doing that empty chair bit and doing the verbal affirmations, I think for some of my clients, they were like, that sounded kind of hokey when you told me about it, but I did it. And yeah, it was really amazing to hear it in my own voice. This pep talk. And, this can be used for a whole bunch of things. So we talk about the idea of aftercare for an activity, regardless of what the activity is. And I'm a big fan of preemptive self-care. So as I may have mentioned, I'm a pretty introverted person. Even though I see the two of you on the screen, I know there are people out there listening. So this is an extroverted activity. But it was making sure that I had my water and I was really settled in and I had some notes and really prepared myself. So I used my anxiety, which could be, jiggly, 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 as energy to prepare myself. Because if you think about it, most of the time for me, anxiety is worrying about the future that you can't do anything about. Depression very often is worrying or ruminating on the past that you can't do anything about. And what do they both do? They take you out of the present moment.
Yes.
So how can I get back into the present moment? I can use some of that anxiety to make my future a little bit better. So, thoughts?
Yes.
So I would encourage the viewers, take some time after this, if you're in a good headspace, what are some affirmations that you would make for yourself? And they can be short, they can be long, they can be very specific too. Like if you're, I worked with a teacher once who really wanted to teach high school science, but was really, really socially anxious. And what we figured out for them was they could get grounded by just playing with their wedding ring. So they would be up in front of class and they would be touching that. So if you're going into a tense situation, how do you prepare yourself for that? I will reveal one of my tricks, whether or not you believe in acupressure. My understanding is this, the Venus mound, as they call it. If you massage that, that's something that's soothing. So if I'm working with a couple that's in a lot of tension, my hands are in my lap and I am massaging that little part of my hand and nobody knows. Well, now you know, but it's a way of taking self-care. And I will admit, there's countertransference. If couples are really in conflict in sessions, that impacts me.
Yes.
So sometimes I'll do some other somatic thing. Like say you're starting to get into an argument with your partner or you're witnessing an argument, if you wiggle your toes, that is a little somatic thing that people don't see that you can do for yourself to kick you out of that, downward slope. So how do we snowball up instead of snowball down? I love your little sparkles too, by the way.
It's a nonverbal agreement.
Yeah. In Burning Man, we frequently used finger snapping as the, you don't actually have anything to say, but, we don't, it's not quite clap level.
But it's also a place of, in our really digital world right now, is to like be in agreement, and to, because sometimes the whole physical thing and the wording, like it just gets all jumbled. So it's easy to like,
Mhm.
oh, this is what it looks like. I love
But
that
it's
you,
also your interpretation, right? It's like how you receive that.
of course. I'm just appreciating what you're bringing to this conversation, and I'm really appreciating the level of directness as well. So I'm like, yes,
Mm.
this is what I'm really appreciating. Like, oh, thank you for bringing this conversation to the viewers, and giving us an opportunity to really look at that.
Yeah.
Aspecting, or open seat, or whatever, it's such a potent and powerful practice, right? Like what Joe was saying is like, so would you take us through the steps of how to do that, kind of, so that when people are like, well, how do I do that? Can I?
Well, yeah, I think it's fairly straightforward. So it's one thing is, hopefully you're in a good headspace,
Mhm.
right? And you're going to want to figure out, are you looking for general affirmations, or are you looking for something more specific? So knowing that you're coming into a tense situation, or you could even, for a challenging conversation, you could do this. Give yourself a little bit of a pep talk beforehand. But I think it makes sense to just do some free writing and brainstorming, because I know some people, I'm a word person, so I like to put things into words. I wonder, now that I'm thinking about it off the cuff, I wonder if you're someone who's more artistic, if it is having a little drawing. I don't know if you're someone who's more singing oriented, can you sing yourself a little song? But in terms of the specifics, it's the thing about it. It is really simple. But I think the issue is to make time for it when you're in that better resourced space. So I'm recognizing that this is not a step-by-step direct thing, but it's more a matter of noticing when you're in a good headspace, and then capturing the things that you believe that will help you, and finding the ways to record, whether that's going to be writing or drawing or doing verbal things that will work for you. As I said earlier, it's like some things will work great for other people, but they won't necessarily work as well for you. So if something is not working for you, don't try to push it too hard. Just say, I tried that thing and that's okay. So I don't know if that's specific enough for you, Trish and Dawn, but I think it is, it's one of those things where it came to me organically, and I think integrating it in an organic way is important as well.
Perfect.
Okay. This has been
I
so
love everything.
delightful. I know we have some time, and I don't know if there are. I'm not looking at the Facebook because I didn't want to hear everything twice, but um, I don't know if we have any reaction from the viewers.
We do have some viewers, and hi to our viewers. You've said some amazing things in the comments. David says, best part of action while in a positive or just happy feeling is the chain reaction. Once you find the path, all you have to do is shift each moment.
Yeah, I love that.
Some of the self-care practices that people do in their isolation is attitude, diets, water, walking, spiritual exercises, and mindset as parts of the whole. So when you were talking about the trip that you took, like really for full safe self-care, is great topic, as I have been hearing that I need to do this solo trip for myself to the desert. Woohoo! Thanks for sharing.
Yeah. Well, and acknowledging that I had the means to do that.
Yes.
But hopefully if I didn't have that means, I might have been able to do something that was less money oriented but still met that need. So this is, as a person of a lot of privilege, I really want to acknowledge that yes, there are things that I do that I'm able to do because of my privilege. I want to identify things that everyone can do, and that that you can hopefully take a little time. And I feel blessed because I live in a house. I don't live in a studio apartment with 2 kids, as one family that I know does. And they're going to have to do things a little bit differently than we're going to have to do things. So I think noting that is really important too.
Thank you.
I feel really full. Thank you.
Oh, good. I celebrate you feeling so full.
What were you going to say, Donna?
Oh, I just was going to acknowledge like the pieces you brought forward about Gestalt work, and also the piece about the client, using our own words, right? And I just did this with one of my clients, and it was a really profound thing for her to help her in those moments where she is struggling, to resource herself and to really have her own voice was so powerful. It was a very powerful piece of homework that was given, and she followed through, and it was incredible to see the shift, to be like, wow, that's a tool that's working for you now. Like in those moments where you would abandon yourself and not make the highest and best choice and then spin out in that place, instead she was able to feel resourced and to know that, oh yes, like I'm tapping into that greater wisdom that I carry inside. It's not outside of me. It's not in the book that I need to read. It's not in the whatever the class I've got to go take or the other person. It's here. It's inside me. Right. And that's all these tools are a way of opening, right? Opening to the wisdom that is inside, because I really firmly believe this, and this is grounded in my work with all my clients, of like really bringing you back home to you have all the answers within.
Yes. Yeah.
Always.
I was thinking about this idea that, I should meditate, and I have tried sitting Zazen. I just don't benefit from it, and I don't enjoy it. It's a chore, right? So imagine making self-care a chore. But I realize that if I run or I walk, I get into very trancy states. Or if I'm doing a long drive, when I went to graduate school, it was in Santa Barbara, so I had to drive back and forth to Santa Barbara once a month for 2 years. And the first time, it was like, I got to King City and I was like, oh boy, it's a long time. And then, by the second year, I would be in like Santa Maria, and I was like, where did those 4 hours go? So obviously I was paying attention to the road, but it's a positive aspect of dissociation because you're not sitting there like mile. So I go back to the reason I race this is figuring out the thing that works for you. So for me, running is really meditative, great. But sitting, legs crossed with that doesn't work for me, and that's okay.
I love that. It really is about honoring you and what you need. It really is about finding the things that not everybody's telling you to do, but the things that you feel inspired to do. Donna and I were just talking about this. I've decided that I'm just not going to do the early morning wake up thing that people do. Like I'm supposed to do I've heard it for my whole life, like 30 years. And I just decided not to. I'm like, you know what? I don't know. I don't fit in that place. I can't get up and I can't do the meditation and exercise. It's not the rhythm of my body.
Yeah.
It has been the most happy few weeks of my life. I'm like, wow, I sleep in, I feel great, I'm resourced, and I show up in the way, and I've scheduled all the things that I want to do in it in the way that's a natural rhythm, right?
Work smarter, not harder.
Yeah, I'm not pushing against the grain. I'm actually going with it now. The grain of me. Like just because the whole society wants me to do something doesn't mean that you have to do it. Like you don't have to fit in if it's like just cramming you into a little box, because those boxes are really, really hard to get into and to get out of.
Well, this funny idea that like for some people, they almost want to impose their self-care on others, not realizing that it may not work for others, which seems sort of counterintuitive, because I think that people think, oh, this will really help you. Trish, waking up early every morning will give you so much more time. Like, no, I don't. It will just annoy me and make the rest of my day cranky. So I'm going to sleep in. I will tell you, I woke up this morning and my alarm went off, and the kids aren't here today, so I got to sleep in a little bit. But I looked at my watch, and I had accidentally hit the crown of my Apple Watch, and it said 10:15, and I had that brief moment of panic, and then I went, okay, no, there's no way it can be 10:15, and but it was just so funny that I was purposefully sleeping in a little bit, but I was worried that I had slept a little too much. So
The alarm. So the alarm in the morning sets me into anxiety. And then sometimes if I have an early morning alarm, I will literally wake up on the hour every hour. I don't know what exactly that is because I'm terrified of missing the bus or not getting on time or something like that. So, so for those, inspired living is just a significantly better way to live. Like if you can find those places where you're not obligated. And this is part of the self-care, right? It's about showing up that's in places where it supports and serves you and serves your most beneficial purpose, rather than being like, oh yeah, Joe told me to get up and I'm supposed to work out and then I'm supposed to meditate and then I'm supposed to do these things, which doesn't actually fit into the rhythm of the existence that I live.
Yeah. Well, think about it. You both coach people, and I do therapy and I do coaching. And you probably know that you can tell someone something and they won't necessarily internalize it. But if you can help lead them there, so I tend to think of myself as a midwife or a shepherd when I work with clients, because I'm showing the way, but it's up to them to get there.
Yes.
And I think, I've had clients say, like, I know you told me this 6 months ago, and I don't know what was wrong with me then. And I was like, there was nothing wrong with you. You weren't ready to hear it yet.
Yes.
And in fact, you needed to hear it inside, not from the outside.
Yes.
So that's that, ongoing theme of self-care.
Self-compassion.
Yay.
And soul's divine timing of when they're ready to make that shift. It's like every soul has their own internal divine timing with things of when the pattern really falls away.
Yeah.
Right? Because the truth is when we desire to really like hone in and work with someone like a coach, like Joe or Trish or I, right? They're wanting to dive into like some really, deeper layers and really understand what this is about and hopefully dissolve it and complete it. Right? And that's the whole goal, is to really level up your consciousness so that you're not showing up in the way that you used to, and that you can expand yourself and show up in a vaster, more expanded way, right? And that's how you don't solve the problems in your life with the old consciousness. You solve it with new consciousness. And how do you do that? You lean into yourself and you work diligently and lovingly, embracing all the parts that have hurt and like really leaning into that pattern and exploring it. Observing yourself, become a neutral observer, observe the pattern, observe how it shows up in your life. Oh, wow. Observe how it shows up with your parents, observe yourself, observe how you're doing it all. And it takes deep inner working and lots of conversations and lots of trying on different tools, different ways of being. And that's what invites in the higher consciousness, because spirit is always giving you that line of energy, that soul line energy to come in to answer the call that you're asking. And so when you say yes to yourself to do the work and you lean in and you say, yes, 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 I want this change, that's when the commitment arrives and you really lean into committing to yourself and the patterns will fall away.
Yeah. Well, and even just this thought about luck, like some people think of luck, and this is the way I think of it, luck is not some magic. Luck is having the awareness to see when the opportunities are there and being able to utilize them. And I think that is why some people seem more lucky, but I think they're more attentive. My grad students know this, that I believe the most important part of therapy education, coaching education, helping education is knowing yourself. And I can teach you CBT techniques, but I can't teach you what it's like to be in your body and to experience yourself. So there's a lot of self-reflection, and it's hard for some of my students because they've never been pointed in this direction. And one, the last of the pithy phrases that I will leave you with is one of my favorites that I had not heard before, which is life is uncomfortable, and you can be uncomfortable now on your terms or later on someone else's terms. So I think this self-confrontation is that little bit of discomfort so that you can show up later for people. And I think when I frame it that way, they're like, oh yeah, I need to have that difficult conversation. But the longer I put it off, the harder it's going to get.
Yes.
And if you do it sooner, you have agency. You are proactive. If you do it later, you have less agency and you are reactive.
Mm-hmm.
So
thank you for saying that. That is such wisdom.
thank you.
I really appreciate that so much.
My pleasure.
If you want more Joe, I have linked all their links into the box, into the comments. So you can go find them. And Joe, thank you so much for bringing your years of love and wisdom into this space.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me, and thank you both for doing this in an ongoing way. You know, you both have a commitment to self-love, and I think it's a thing that people really need to be reminded of. That it's a thing that really just makes life more rich and more wonderful. Is being able to self-love.
It helps build our relationships too. And I do believe that the ability to love oneself expands the capacity to love others.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm connection oriented as a person, and I think that I'm not the only one. Like, we're pretty much connection oriented, and we're living in tribal communities, kind of in some ways, and we're, you know, we have work and we connect with other people all the time. So when you can rely on yourself, when you're working through your triggers and the things that like upset you, and you can just show up in a more loving, compassionate space for not only you, but for other people, is a way that we can build better lives together.
Yeah. I agree.
It's important. You know, it's important for every person to know that you're not alone in your journey of spiritual awakening. Wherever you are in your journey, in your life, in your curriculum, you're not alone. And there's always tools, resources, answers, and a way to level up your life, and however that is for you, right? And you get to choose that. That's the power. You get to choose it.
Thank you both so much, Dawn. I love doing couples therapy with you.
Me too, love.
Joe, I'm going to process through this for some time, like the depth and just the juice that you brought in. I'm like, oh, I've got a lot to think about on my drive today.
I love that you're light and right too. You rhyme.
I know, right? Like, we didn't even plan that. Like, that's the funny part about it. We were like, hey, like, we noticed it in the beginning and just kind of giggled. So it's the thing.
Yeah, I'm synchronicities. I just love them. So
this was such a synchronistic thing. Like, the universe was just like, here you go, like, you too, there, you know. So we just dove right in.
Excellent.
Well, that also brings me back to thanking Love Coach Academy for running us, like for being the muse and the inspiration for the show.
Completely.
Thank you, Scott, for being a beautiful, loving mentor to me, and for really giving me many opportunities and giving Dawn and I many opportunities to really show up. And
gratitude.
Thank you, Scott. And I'd also like to thank John and Summer Raymer for hosting us on Sign Network, and for sharing us out to the world so that we can bring Joe's fantastically just like interpersonal, like you got it, stellar work into the world. Thank you. And thank you all for joining us today. And I'd love to hear in your comments about what you're getting out of the show, so we can give some, get some juicy tidbits, and we'll, respond. And we will see you next week on Thursday. Bye.
Hey, everybody. Have an amazing week.